This is the Laymat revolver. It was a double-action pistol that was made in 1864 and was seldom used by the South. It was a cap-and-ball revolver and had a 3-inch bore with an extra 16-inch below it that fired pellets like a shotgun for close-quarter combat. This gun was invented in New Orleans. The South contracted a French company to make them, but the French made these models so poorly, the South had to contract the British to make these pistols instead.
This is the Colt Army revolver. It was used by the Union throughout the war and was the standard issue sidearm. It was a .44 caliber cap-and-ball single-action revolver that was made in 1861. This pistol was loaded by putting the ball and powder in the cylinder and then using the ramrod to push them in. These were made in New Haven, Connecticut.
This is the Colt Navy revolver. It was used by the Graybacks throughout the Civil War. This revolver was a .36 caliber single-action cap-and-ball revolver with a 6-shot cylinder. It had the exact same action loading mechanism as the Colt Army. The only difference between the two was the barrel length and caliber. It was also made in New Haven, Connecticut.
This is the Star revolver. It was used by the Union Army later on in the war. It was one of the least common revolvers. It was made in 1864 and was a .44 caliber with a 6-shot cylinder. It was originally double action, meaning that when the trigger was pulled, it fired and recocked the hammer. Eventually this became too expensive for the Army, so they had Star make a single action variant. These were accurate up to about 50 yards.
This is the Mini-Ball. The Mini-Ball represented a significant advancement in bullet technology. It was shaped much like the modern-day bullet and was made from lead, while previously musket balls had bounced around in the barrel, causing reductions in accuracy. The Mini-Ball, however, had a hollow bottom. This meant that when the powder was ignited, the bottom of the ball expanded to fill the barrel, gripping the rifling, preventing it from bouncing around, making it more accurate. This was issued to every soldier that had a muzzle loader, and they were stored in a box that soldiers referred to as a sardine box. These caused massive damage on impact, and due to the pain they caused, they were referred to as hornets.
This is a paper cartridge. It was a piece of parchment paper with black powder and a bullet inside. The soldier would bite the end of the cartridge to separate the bullet from the powder and then dump the powder down the barrel and then load the bullet. This made loading easier, as the soldier only had to pull one item out of their sardine box instead of two. Additionally, this meant that the soldier didn't have to measure the amount of powder to use, and consequently never used the wrong amount.
This is the enclosed brass cartridge. This was a fairly new advancement when the Civil War rolled around and was only used towards the end of the war. The cartridge had the bullet at the top, the brass cartridge, which contained black powder, and a percussion cap on the rim of the cartridge. This is where the term rimfire originated from. These were used in weapons such as the Star revolver and the Henry Repeater, as well in carbines like the Spencer. These cartridges made it possible for soldiers to fight in the rain because rain could not penetrate the brass shelling that surrounded the black powder.
This is the Springfield Model 1861. It was a rifled musket. That means that it had a very long barrel like a musket, but also rifling inside the barrel like a modern-day rifle. The rifling consisted of grooves inside the barrel that cut into the bullet, causing it to spin and therefore increasing accuracy and range. This rifle was accurate up to 300 yards. It was a muzzle-loaded .58 caliber that used a percussion cap primer system. After inserting both the ball and the powder into the barrel, the soldier would insert a percussion cap, which was a copper disc that contained a small amount of explosive, which was the primer for the powder. The cap was placed on top of the breech, where the hammer would hit the percussion cap, triggering the powder, which would launch the bullet.
This is the Enfield rifled musket. It was manufactured in England. It was made for both Confederate and Union soldiers. This weapon was the second most common rifled musket during the Civil War because, like the Springfield Model 1861, it was a general issue weapon. It was accurate up to 900 meters. It used the .577 caliber Minié-Ball, and it was a muzzle-loading percussion cap firing system. This model was made in 1863 It was an old model compared to the other rifles during the Civil War, like the Model 1861. Despite appearing simplistic, the Enfield rifled musket contained over 56 parts.
This is the Henry Repeater. It was a lever-action repeating rifle. It was invented in 1862 and fired the .44 caliber rim-fire cartridge. This gun was used by scouts, ambushers, and soldiers that were in raiding parties. This weapon could hold 16 rounds in the tubular magazine beneath the barrel. When a lever was pulled downwards, the breech would open, ejecting a spent casing. Then, the mechanism would bring another bullet up from the magazine. When the lever was closed, the breech closed, inserting the bullet into the barrel and leaving the hammer cocked back, ready to fire. This gun was never general issue. Instead, soldiers bought it with their own money because they thought it would help them survive. This was because their duties required quick fire that a rifled musket couldn't provide. Confederates thought this was unfair because, as one Confederate soldier put it, the Union could load on Sunday and shoot all week.
This is the Sharps carbine. A carbine is a gun that has a shorter barrel than a rifle or a rifled musket. While the Springfield 1861 had a 40-inch barrel, the Sharps carbine had an 18-inch barrel. This gun and all carbines were used by cavalry during the war because they were more manageable on horseback due to the shorter barrel size. This weapon was a breech loader and used paper cartridge rounds. It was loaded by pulling down on the trigger guard, which lowered a compartment that the cartridge was inserted into. Once the compartment was closed, by pulling back up on the trigger guard, a blade fell, cutting the back of the cartridge, which left the powder exposed so that it could be ignited by the percussion cap. This carbine was a .52 caliber that was made in 1848. Over 80,000 were produced for the Union during the Civil War.
This is the Spencer carbine. It was used by the Union, mainly by cavalry. It was a repeating carbine. When the trigger guard was pulled down, it would eject a spent casing and insert a new round into the barrel. Then, the hammer would have to be manually pulled back, and the trigger guard would have to be returned to its original position. It used a cartridge that was a .52 caliber rimfire, and it held 7 rounds in the buttstock. It was made in 1863.
This is the Napoleon smoothbore cannon. The 12-pound variant was the most widely used cannon during the Civil War. It was popular because of its reliability and power at close range. It reached America in 1857, while most were made out of brass. Around 100 of these cannons were found made from cast iron. The Napoleon, along with other Civil War cannons, could fire several different types of projectiles. Shot rounds were solid projectiles with no explosives. Shells were similar but contained an explosive charge and were designed to fragment, damaging anything surrounding the blast radius. Case rounds were shrapnel rounds designed to be anti-personnel. Whereas shell rounds produced only a few fragments, case rounds were loaded with many small lead or iron balls. The round exploded before the enemy line, raining these projectiles down on them. Canister rounds, widely believed to be the most deadly anti-personnel rounds, were equivalent to a shotgun shell. The canister ruptured upon leaving the barrel, spraying shrapnel with an effective range up to 400 yards. Chain shot was used mainly against ships. It consisted of 2 spears connected by a chain and was designed to cut the mast, therefore making the ship ineffective.